Hi everyone, my name is Ali Bruce and today I'm going to talk to you about the importance of belonging. Happy International Day of Disability. I would like to thank Lou for asking me to talk on this day. Noah's Ark has a very special place in my heart. Not only did I receive early intervention and borrow equipment through the Specialist Equipment Library, but I also worked here as an inclusion support facilitator. It is really meaningful for me to give back to an organisation that has given me so much. Today, I'm going to talk about the importance of belonging. I'm going to share some stories and highlight my own perspective shift surrounding inclusion and disability. I hope it's something that you will talk about or remember when you have questions in your own practices. I'm going to start by quoting my favourite psychologist and theorist of the 1900s, just so I sound super smart. But truly, his work on belonging has really resonated with me and my beliefs on inclusion. He stated, "When we feel encouraged, we feel capable and appreciated and will generally act in a connected and cooperative way. When we are discouraged, we may act in unhealthy ways by competing, withdrawing, or giving up. It is in finding ways of expressing and accepting encouragement, respect, and social interest that helps us feel fulfilled and optimistic." This theory and practice has proven especially productive as applied to the growth and development of children. Alfred Adler believes that a misbehaving child is a discouraged child, and that helping children to feel valued, significant, and competent is often the most effective strategy in coping with difficult child behaviours. According to our early years learning framework used in early childhood settings, belonging is recognised as critical in a child's development, the basis of relationships in defining identity. So today we're going to explore the implications of belonging when your identity is somewhat impacted by something you cannot change or already defines a part of you. For example, disability. I'm going to share some personal stories from my life, work, and travels where I've seen, experienced firsthand, observed, and learnt the impact of what it means not to fit in. I was born with cerebral palsy. It affects the left side of my body. In my body, CP has tight muscles in my left arm and left leg. Cerebral palsy hemiplegia is my official diagnosis. As a child, I saw physiotherapists and doctors regularly and also took part in special swimming programs. During my childhood, I had two major operations, one at 5 years old and the other at 12, which both lined up with starting a new school. I also went through many different orthotics and AFOs. My mum was a psychologist, my dad a teacher, and I have a little brother and a little sister. On my first day of prep, I didn't wear my AFOs, plastic leg braces, as I didn't want to be different from everyone else. My mum's ingenious idea was to wear a ruler stuck in the back of my shoe under my pants. This way I would know if I wasn't standing straight, as the ruler would poke me in the back of the knee. My dad had also modified my lunchbox as I couldn't open it due to my left arm weakness. So it could open easily, he drilled a hole in the bottom and attached some string that ran under the lid. When you pulled the string, the lid would pop off. I started school with no labels. My parents decided not to tell me or the teachers that I had cerebral palsy. Instead, my teachers and I were told I had muscle weakness on the left side of my body. At school, I was bullied. I was called a retard and a spastic. I was left out of games because my peers thought I couldn't do it. I also had older kids ask me to run so they could laugh and look and yell and say, "Run, Forrest, run." Label or no label, bullying happens. I always struggle to think if having a label would have helped. When someone says cerebral palsy, I wouldn't think of me. I would think of someone in a wheelchair. I would probably also think they weren't capable of much. This is probably why my parents didn't say anything. At my school, there were 2 children out of 600 with a disability. One of them often came over to play at my house until she left in grade 2. About 15 years later, I saw Millie at a coffee shop. The only reason I recognised her was because I remembered her parents and put 2 and 2 together. Millie has an intellectual disability. She obviously went to a special school located about 3 suburbs away, out of our local community. How do I know this? Because that's where all people who look like Millie go. All the people in wheelchairs or who act funny go there, and that's where she fits in. Whilst waiting for my coffee, a few thoughts went through my head. I don't know how to say hello to someone with a disability, let alone hold a conversation. I don't want parents to see me and feel sad that Millie isn't doing what I can do. I don't want to offend Millie or her family unintentionally by saying the wrong thing. So what did I do? I pretended not to see them and left. So where did my ability to interact with Millie go? When I think of Millie's community and her identity through my eyes, Millie's identity is that disabled girl, her parents the disabled girl's parents, her and her family's community, or where they belong, are families dotted all over Melbourne Bayside area who also have a disability. My parents told me just before I went to high school that I had cerebral palsy, a disability. But what did this mean? I was disabled? Never had I thought of myself as that. I knew that I was limited, but I'd never identified as being a person with a disability. I remember one of the first things I did was look up the life expectancy. Luckily, it was pretty vague. But hang on a second. I have a disability, but I went to primary school with all the children in my local community. Is that because I was deemed normal enough to stay in the mainstream? I know a lot of you are thinking it's pretty mild cerebral palsy, but let me tell you, when you're the only person with a physical disability amongst 600 people, you definitely feel like you were pretty different. As I moved into adulthood, I got involved in the early childhood sector with a keen interest in disability and performing arts. I worked as an early childhood educator for over 12 years in various roles. I really enjoy working with children and families, and I'm such a nerd for children's development. One thing I always found interesting watching was children interacting, watching their first attempts at communication, establishing safety and friendship, amongst others. My role as an educator is to facilitate this, create a space and opportunities for them to have positive first experiences. But not all interactions are positive, and for some, they're overwhelmingly negative. The story that I'm about to tell you is kind of blunt, but I think a necessary one to share when it comes to a personal journey with inclusion. Also, keep in mind the story I just told you about identity and what my community has socially taught me. I had a child in my 2 to 3 year old room who was really challenging. Let's call him Max. He was about 2.5 years old. His behaviour was extremely aggressive. It felt like all he did all day was hit and squash other kids. He was in 4 days a week and I dreaded those days. Before he came in each day, I would pack up anything that wasn't bolted to the floor. The rest of the children in the room were fearful of this little guy, and I was too. I did nothing but perpetuate the children's fear and isolate him for his behaviour. Before he started in my room, other teachers had told me about his behaviour. The label autism had been mentioned, and I already felt underprepared for this child. I was somewhat helpless. I spoke to my director daily about why I thought he should go to special childcare or not be in childcare at all. We also had a lot of complaints from other parents, and this added to the building pressure for him to be excluded. So there I was surviving. My programming was reactive and the days were long and exhausting. By reactive, I mean we spent a lot of time outside and there was next to no planned activities, as they ended up in an all-out brawl with everyone crying. I also spent a lot of time blaming Max for the fact that other children were scared and not learning, blaming Max's parents for not getting him a diagnosis or help. I also had pegged my happiness on him being diagnosed with autism, as then it wouldn't be my problem anymore. Eventually, one magical day, his parents took him to the paediatrician and he received a diagnosis of PDD-NOS. Straight onto Google I went. Surely it was going to give me the answers as to stop this child from being so aggressive. Pervasive developmental disorder not otherwise specified. All I really found was a checklist of behaviours that I was already experiencing. The diagnosis changed nothing. The inclusion support facilitator visited, and again, I was initially disappointed. She didn't give me answers, and I wanted her to come in, look at Max, tell me he was the worst child in the world and that he needed to go to special school. But she didn't. She gave me some resources on sensory activities and pointed me in the direction of training around ASD and speech and language. So what? This is still my problem. When I looked at Max, I saw a diagnosis I didn't understand. Instead of trying to understand him, I went to work waving a white flag, waiting for someone else to tell me what to do. What I needed to do was to understand him. I am an educator. I'm trained to support children. Max is a child. So I started to see Max. I needed to look for his strengths as a little person, not his diagnosis, not his list of destructive behaviours. I started to become enthusiastic about implementing some change into my program. Max was no longer going to be the naughty boy in my class who was wrecking my program. I was going to modify my program to support him, support his strengths, and change his identity. I had to change my attitude. I needed to help him fit in, not stand out for his challenges. If anyone's going to role model a positive change in this child's identity, that's going to have to be me. The first thing we did was set up a consistent behaviour guidance plan, discussed it with all the children and teachers, and followed it through. If anyone was rough, they went to the book corner to calm down. All children were empowered with phrases such as "stop, I don't like it," so they felt some control in the situation, and this also acted as a good indicator for educators to step in and help. Everyone in the class had the same behaviour guidance approach, as then Max didn't just experience the process, he watched it too. The expectation was the same from everyone, and the learning and understanding for Max was double met now. We gave every child a job, a role in the routine that couldn't happen without them. I started to see how much the children responded to responsibility, even Max. Being accountable not only supported the child's sense of belonging, but also boosted their confidence. Max's job was to hand out the cups at lunchtime. All he had to do was put a cup in front of each child who was sitting at the table. This not only gave him a chance to succeed, it gave me a chance to praise him and for his friends to see him positively. Max changed from the boy that hits me to Max who gives out the cups. I still remember one day when Max was homesick, another child said, "Max isn't here. Who's going to do the cups?" This was the moment I got it. We found something in Max to work with, a strength. His identity had changed amongst his community, along with his sense of belonging. We weren't afraid of Max. In actual fact, we needed him, not just to give out the cups, but he taught us all how to become resilient and inclusive of everyone. He changed my whole entire practice. The cup handing out also gave me a space to work from, some strengths and capabilities. It wasn't long before I was able to start engaging him in other aspects of the program and then finally getting him to help in group activities. I now look back at that story in horror. Imagine I just gave up. Imagine I did get my wish at that time and he was removed from the group. What lessons would I have unknowingly supported and behaviours of exclusion modelled for another generation? Inclusion is a journey, a bloody bumpy one, but you have to start somewhere, and that's where I kind of started. Most of the time, we begin with our heart in the right place. It's just about being open, growing, learning, and being wrong. I volunteered regularly with very special kids and camps for people with disabilities, and then decided to learn more about inclusion by taking a 6-week placement at a childcare centre in the Northern Territory. I really wanted to learn about disability and Aboriginal culture. This experience taught me so much. On reflection, the funniest part of the whole placement was I was chosen to come and support the local educators at the centre to implement behaviour guidance. Like a tiny super nanny with not a disciplinary bone in my body, they decided I would be best for that job. I do not know where I got the confidence or maybe the ignorance to accept that position. I went to Wadeye. It's located 450 kilometres out of Darwin and is one of the largest remote Aboriginal communities in Australia. The local language is Miriam-Partha. English is second or third or fourth to other local dialects. When you land in Wadeye, you could quite easily think you've landed in a third world country, which in some respects you have. The first week I was in Wadeye, the older ladies in the community referred to me as the little sick girl. I spent countless encounters trying to correct this, showing scars on my leg, using complicated words to label myself so they would stop referring me to the town's medical clinic. This was my first encounter of what disability is in Aboriginal culture. My conclusion: they think my disability is a sickness and I should get some help. Over the weekend, we went for a swim in the waterfall. On the very top of the waterfall, a little boy was playing. He was about 3 years old. One of the girls I was with said, "See that little boy up there? His name's Sebastian, and he has a diagnosis of global developmental delay." I sat in the water and watched him climb over rocks, throw pebbles over the waterfall, and carefully navigate around the slippery edge. I thought to myself, I wonder if a 3-year-old child with a diagnosis of global developmental delay would be allowed to wander along the edge of anything. let alone a waterfall in a city like Melbourne. Is this neglectful or high expectations? Do his parents know his capabilities, or do they treat him exactly the same as their other children? What does his diagnosis even mean up here? The next week, I was at creche, and my referrals to the doctor's clinic were still coming in pretty regularly, until one teenager yelled across the playground to me, "Hey, white fella, are you crippled?" I paused for a second, in my head going to default of, now that's not a very nice thing to say, but instead answered, "Yep, that'll do." There were no more questions after that, no more referrals either. I then got to thinking about Sebastian on the waterfall edge again. Children in this community in Wadair who have a disability are just part of the mob. They may be crippled, but they aren't left out. If life is that simple, you're either crippled or not, but the expectation is the same. Who is doing inclusion better? In Wadair, the Aboriginal children all play together. Sometimes it looks rough, but no one's left out. If you're too small to keep up, you're put on the back of the bike. All the children support each other no matter what their ability is. What was really interesting is in the 3 to 5-year-old room, there were also 4 white children. They didn't play with the Aboriginal children, but these 4 children would spend the whole entire day saying the all too familiar phrases. "Ava isn't playing with me. She isn't coming to my party." Where does this come from? Why is exclusion part of play? And how come I didn't see that within the local Aboriginal children's play? And just so you know, not one of my behaviour guidance techniques worked in Wadair. Singing through transitions doesn't really work there when half the kids don't speak the language you assumed they would understand. I had a lot to learn about the country I live in, and I still do. When I got back to Melbourne, I started looking at all of this through different eyes. When you look around the room and the building and even just how this whole first world country Melbourne works, who is it built for? Able-bodied humans who are 5 foot tall and above with an understanding of English and Western culture. There are signs for people with a disability to use different entrances, different parking. Society divides us, even if it is in best interests. Do we as adults and professionals in children's lives pave a way for children based upon our own experiences and society's beliefs of people? Our own expectations instead of being able to look at it from another point of view, whether that is culturally or family-centred. Sometimes in our haste to best support a child the way we know or understand, we forget what the implications on that family can be. I now work as the creative director of a performing arts school I have helped set up called BAM Arts Inc. It is an all ability, all ages, you just have to have an interest for performing arts. I'm consistently challenged by my own understanding of inclusion. I live and breathe it. I make mistakes, but I always try to learn as many perspectives as possible. I listen. I also now have my own little inclusion warrior. Her name is Sunday and she is 13 months old. When I look at her, I can't believe my body knew how to make such perfect legs. Her muscles are so loose yet tight when she needs them to be. She puts her heels down, she points her toes. When I see the maternal child health nurse, Sunday ticks all the boxes, all the normal boxes. Life goes on. I am also now ridiculously aware of how overwhelming it must be to have a child who doesn't reach traditional milestones. How heavy a diagnosis is, how much it would change your expected path. I want to see change in my lifetime. I hope that when a child is diagnosed or born with a disability, we celebrate and welcome that human just like any other. I hope the conversation around disability moves from sympathy to empowerment. I hope that we start to see each other's potential rather than our faults. So on this International Day of Disability, I ask you to challenge what you think inclusion is. Ask questions, point out things that could change to help others feel welcome or improve access. Be the annoying person who tells the shop owner to move the packing boxes out of the disabled toilets. It's ingrained in society to feel sorry for people with a disability, and we need to stop that narrative. Shake off your preloaded information and learn about the person and how they interact with their disability. Everyone truly is different, and that's why it's important we all feel as though we belong. Thank you.